you so much for joining us. Welcome to you both. Paul, I'll let you introduce. On the floor is yours. And good morning, Emma.
Okay. Well, Paul Christensen, Professor at Newcastle University, Senior Advisor, National Fire Chiefs Council, subject matter expert to the Ministry of Defence, various British Standards Institute committees. My research focuses on thermal runaway and thermal propagation in large lithium-ion battery systems. I'm currently down to Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service Training Centre. Big thanks to Andy Holden out there, where we are testing so-called lithium-ion battery fire extinguishers. Spoiler alert, they aren't. I spend a lot of time working with first responders, especially the fire services, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So over to Emma. You're still on mute, dear.
Morning, everyone, or evening. Emma Sutcliffe. I'm the Director of EV FireSafe, based in Melbourne in Australia, as you can probably tell from the accent. EV FireSafe's a company funded by the Australian Department of Defence to research electric vehicle battery fires and emergency response. And I'm also an operational firefighter, bush fire firefighter here in Australia as well.
Okay, John, back to you, unless you want me to start.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can start, Paul. Cheers.
Right, here we go. Put the sound on, put that on. No, why is it not allowing me to? Oh, there we go. Can you see that? Trust you can. Yeah.
Yeah, we got it.
Great. So, come on, you heap of crap. I'm gonna move on. There we go. So, what have we learned so far about lithium-ion battery fires? Funded by the Faraday Institution, which was set up to create a lithium-ion battery industry in the UK. And actually, I think initially there wasn't a safety project, but I think largely down to the work we were doing on another project, they decided to create one. So what's a lithium-ion battery? It's the simplest possible battery you can get. There's no actual chemical conversion. What you have is a thin layer of a mixed metal oxide smeared on a metal foil current corrector, in this case lithium cobalt oxide, and a thin smear of graphite particles on another current collector, pressed tightly either side of a porous plastic membrane filled with a mixture of organic solvents called called carbonates, lithium hexafluorophosphate, which dissolves to give you the lithium ions, and up to 5% additives. We know what the additives are likely to be, but we don't know what they are in any particular battery because they're commercial secrets. But many are toxic and some are cytotoxic, so don't get any on your skin, basically. Because the vast majority of batteries have graphite as the anode, we call them by what the cathode material is. So lithium cobalt oxide, LCO, lithium ion, or more correctly, ferrous phosphate, LFP, but they don't like more than 3 letters. So lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide is NMC. If you look at the right, when the battery is fully discharged, all the lithium ions are inside the mixed metal oxide particles. When you supply electricity, they come out of the mixed metal oxide and go into the graphite particles. And when you discharge, essentially the reverse happens. But there's been nothing like this, no battery like this on this planet before in terms of storing so much energy in such a small space. It's so simple, it's called a rocking chair battery. But that huge energy density is both a boon and a bit of a challenge. It's a double-edged sword, as you will see. Now, to put it in context, and these have been quite simply pinched from EV FireSafe, pinched from Emma. So electric car instance since 2010 globally that have been verified is just about 600, okay? And that includes electric bus incidents to date, and about 28, I think, something like that, electric bus incidents. So the probability of you encountering an EV incident still remains fairly low. Now, of course, as the cars get older and as we get more and more on the roads, we don't know what's going to happen. Now, thermal runaway. the very first time you charge a lithium-ion battery, the lithiums move into the graphite, and that lithiated graphite is at such a huge energy, it immediately reacts with the organic solvent, generating HF, hydrogen, methane, and lots of heat. That heat speeds up that process, generating even more gases and even more heat. And if that was allowed to continue, the cell would simply explode. Instead, what actually happens at the same time is a protective layer forms around the graphite particles called the solid electrolyte interface, which could not have been predicted. That protects the particles, but allows the lithium ions free passage. So it acts like a prophylactic. And a key aspect of thermal runaway is if that layer gets damaged or corroded, you get thermal runaway. Those exothermic heat producing processes start again. And in every battery plant across the world, when they first charge they leave it for at least 2 weeks to make sure that solid electrolyte interface, that SEI, forms effectively. Now, if there is any form of abuse, heating, crushing, penetration, overcharging, or defects or contamination introduced at the manufacturing stage, those exothermic heat-producing processes can start again because the SEI is damaged. Heat is produced exponentially, the red line. It's dissipated linearly, the blue line. But it's only dissipated from the surfaces of the battery, whereas it's produced throughout the whole of the volume of the battery. And hence, the bigger the battery, the more that heat is retained. Now, when those lines cross, there will be a measurable temperature rise. And that's the simplest definition of thermal runaway or uncontrolled positive feedback. 1 degree centigrade per minute to 10 degrees centigrade per second. A better definition is when those exothermic heat-producing processes become self-sustaining and cannot be stopped. That's thermal runaway. So these are tests we did back at the Fire Services College back in 2020. So when abuse occurs, you get a huge amount, and I mean a huge amount of gas produced inside the cells. That gas includes hydrogen, up to 50%, or even 80% for LFP, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nasty acids like hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen chloride, and hydrogen cyanide, hundreds of ppm, ethane, methane, and other hydrocarbons. And when they vent from the cells, they take with them small droplets of organic solvent, which is what you can see here. That is not steam, it is not smoke. It's a vapor cloud. Now that's a single module, 24 modules in a 40 kilowatt hour battery, okay? And that went on for 12 minutes. Now, again, these batteries, lithium-ion batteries, produce huge amounts of the vapor cloud. So this is experiments we did in 2021 in RAF Spadeadam, the DNV site. We were trying to create a vapor cloud so we could ignite it. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of abuse. This is nail penetration, but any kind of abuse can give you the similar kind of responses. What you'll see first are the heavy metals blasted out, looking like a black smoke. Again, this is a single module. There's 24 in a 40 kilowatt hour electric car. Then you get the vapor cloud. You always get two forms of the vapor cloud, a heavier than air, and in this case, a lighter than air, but only one dominates. In this case, it's the lighter than air vapor cloud. Now, the lower explosion limit is between 6 to 11%, depending upon the chemistry of the battery and other factors. But the immediate danger to life and health is much, much lower than that. And the key point here is that red sentence, 500 to 6,000 litres per kilowatt hour. So for a 100 kilowatt hour car, you're looking at 50,000 to 600,000 litres of toxic and explosive gas. Now imagine that in somebody's bedroom. People are cannibalizing electric vehicles, battery packs, including damaged ones, to make battery energy storage systems for their solar arrays. And there are no regulations as to where they put these. We've got a clear plastic blast wall behind us here, and that the vapor cloud is rolling down it. So the light is darkening. Now you can see the heavier than air vapor cloud. When the module finally ignites, then the gas is reverse direction. And I don't know about you, but imagine that in somebody's home. that terrifies the life out of me. Now, there are 5 main hazards, and this is the sum total of our learning, the kind of non-scientific bit, if you like, the applied bit, from the last 5 years or so, as well as the toxic gas and fumes. If the vapor cloud vents from the electric vehicle and ignites immediately, you get blowtorch-like flames at 1200 degrees C. Some commentators say 2000 degrees C, which come out typically at shin level. If, however, the vapor cloud ignites inside the vehicle, you get a confined vapor cloud explosion. So it can ignite, you can get the battery exploding initially from a pressure explosion and then, of course, ignition, or the gas can vent into the passenger compartment and explode. These are the worst, in my view, from your perspective, because there can be little or no warning. They produce shrapnel, and they may or may not produce flames. If they do produce flames, it can be 10 meters or more long. If they don't, following the initial explosion, the vapor cloud starts again, and you've got an explosion risk again. And then you can get the venting from the vehicle, delayed ignition to give you an unconfined vapor cloud explosion. Now, this is what I show first responders. And I say, if I do nothing else, but you take away this, I'll have done some good. Use your common senses, because they are significantly better than any gas sensors you might find. So thermal runaway, gases and heat. If you get a confined vapor cloud explosion, basically put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye, because you may get very little warning. If, however, the gases vent, the first thing you will hear is a loud popping noise, then typically a screaming or hissing noise. You'll see the black smoke come out first, which isn't smoke, it's the heavy metal nanoparticles or the contents of the cells. Then you'll see the white vapor cloud. If that ignites immediately, 1 to 2 meter long flames, 1000 degrees centigrade, 1200 degrees centigrade. If it doesn't ignite immediately, you can get an unconfined vapor cloud explosion. When it's all over, you've got the danger, the hazard of stranded electrical energy, which can lead to arc flash, and you can get reignition. And reignition has occurred hours, days, weeks, even months after the initial event, and it can do so many times. So consequences, toxic fumes. This is Parsons Green. It's an e-scooter. It's basically gone on fire. That's the owner who's got a lung full of the smoke. That's one long train, no compartments. And you can see the amount of smoke coming out from that e-scooter. And it's being found that casualties that have suffered inhalation respond far worse to the normal treatments than for conventional fires. This is another key learning. Even power tool batteries can cause fires to develop into full house or flat fires very quickly. This is an e-moped shop in the United States, e-bike shop effectively. So you can see why they develop so quickly. This is in New York in a shopping mall.
An extraordinary amount of damage from this single bike that you can see here.
Can't really hear the commentary, but it's basically, you can see the words.
We are still here fighting this fire. We have over
The firefighters arrived within 4 minutes, but the fire was already out of control, and it was from just a simple bike, e-scooter, sorry.
Into the building and started to extinguish the fire. The amount of fire that is produced by a single battery in just under 5 minutes.
This is the Potter's Bar e-bus fire, occurred in amongst a load of about 5 other buses. Interestingly, when the water's put onto the batteries, there was an explosion. And you will see that the cells were projected 200 meters burning. Now, the bottom line here is, unless you can get your suppressant actually to the cells that are in thermal runaway, it's utterly pointless deploying a suppressant. This is a Tesla, clipped another vehicle. and then crashed into the wall. This is a battery explosion. No petrol or diesel. This is, again, a battery explosion, this time without fire. You can see the damage, the roof of the carport, that's the bonnet of the car, and that's the roof of the car. This is in South Korea. This is a battery explosion with flames.
아파트 주차장에 있는 소형 벤 차량. 아래쪽에서 폭발이 생긴 것처럼 불길이 솟구치면서 주변으로 번집니다.
Another form of confined vapor cloud explosion is where the vapor cloud leaks into the passenger compartment. This occurred in June. It was Renault Zoe. Another one did the same in Neuss. In this case, the car exploded, shrapnel everywhere, wrecked the garage, and it set fire to the BMW that was parked outside. Now, this is the first detonation we've had. Again, it's a Renault Zoe. It's kind of a confined vapor cloud explosion and kind of not. That's the vapor cloud. And this is a Jeep Wrangler. It's only 17 kilowatt hours. It's gone into thermal runaway. The fire officers have put a hose into the driver's side of the car, which of course is not actually doing any good. And this happens. And notice the vapor cloud starts again. This is Heathrow Airport. Increasingly, we're seeing cases where the vapor cloud is produced. You can see the sheer volume of gas that's coming off, which eventually ignites. And we've had similar things happening in other cities where you get no ignition or delayed ignition. This is St. Ives, Jaguar I-Pace, top left, just sitting outside the house. Again, the vapor cloud produced. This is Shanghai, drove over some debris, parked up. Sometime later, this happened. And I believe this took out the cars, 2 on one side and 1 on the other. This was a house, domestic battery energy storage system, only 30 kilowatt hours. It's ripped out the side of the house, as you can see, damaged the roof, and the fire investigators are not being allowed in because the structure is too dangerous. And that's only a 30 kilowatt hour domestic battery energy storage system. Domestic systems run from 2 to about 130 kilowatt hours. Do-it-yourself ones can be any size. This is, again, a Jeep Wrangler. It's only 17 kilowatt hours. It's inside a garage. The vapor cloud vented and exploded. This is the explosion in Surprise in Arizona, 2019. Fire service didn't know what it was, didn't know it was a lithium-ion battery system. There was no markings on it, remotely monitored. The smoke alarm triggered and deployed Novec 1230, which is a liquid that vaporizes to form an inert gas. This form of suppression is likely to be banned because it switches the hazard from fire to explosion, which is exactly what happened here. This was monitored remotely, but nobody was looking at the screen until an hour later. At the same time, people passing on the highway saw what they thought was smoke rolling across the prairie and reported a prairie fire. In fact, it was the heavier than air vapor cloud. The fire brigade arrived shortly afterwards and were met by the technician who explained what the system was. They went on the internet for a further 2 hours, so 3 hours after the initial smoke alarm, opened the door. 3 minutes later, there was a massive explosion. It blew the four of the firefighters backwards. One of them was blown 75 feet. The flame was 75 foot long and 20 feet high. 2 of them were badly injured, 2 of them very severely injured. And this was the first time that we'd realized that hydrogen cyanide was produced. This is a video, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to play it. But if you get the chance to watch this, it's free. It's on the Underwriters Laboratories Fire Research Institute website, which has loads and loads of really great stuff. And it's the eyewitness account of the hazmat leader Now, in that container, there were 27 racks containing lithium-ion batteries. Only one rack went up. That one rack boiled off the vapor cloud for 3 hours. It leaked out of the container, but there was still sufficient in there for it to explode and cause a violent explosion. And when the hazmat leader used his thermal imaging camera, he basically reported that there was 104 degrees Fahrenheit and no visible flame. And that's because the vapor cloud shields thermal imaging cameras from the heat source. The vapor cloud absorbs certain frequencies of infrared light very effectively. Now, there's been about 60 battery energy storage system fires. Essentially, because you cannot get the suppressant and water remains the best of the bad suppressants to the actual cells in thermal runaway and to stop thermal propagation, increasingly the standard operating procedure is to let it burn. And it's the same for electric vehicles. But of course, that's the conundrum for first responders. If you've got an EV or a battery energy storage system in a populated area on a busy junction, or you've got a BESS near an environmentally sensitive area, well, you can't really let it burn, can you? Residential battery energy storage systems, there are no regulations. There's no requirement to inform the local fire service. In many ways, in the UK, the standards, the regulations, it's just the Wild West, unfortunately. Now, this is an EMS. It's in a research facility for a large manufacturer. There's a 100 kilowatt hour electric vehicle battery gone into thermal runaway without fire. The local fire service had not been trained on lithium-ion batteries. They knew nothing about the vapor cloud. So they were wading initially through knee-deep, heavier than air vapor cloud. And then the battery pack started to produce the lighter than air vapor cloud, which started to reduce visibility, as you can see. They went in and out of that room 4 times. It used, by the way, CO2 suppression. 4 times before that happened. Now, the owners of the facility should have known better than to use CO2 suppression. If you kill the fire, but you do not stop thermal propagation, you switch the hazard from fire to explosion. And education, information is absolutely essential for every stakeholder, council planning officers, first responders, the public, government, you name it. And first responders could easily find themselves smoke diving in a potentially explosive and toxic atmosphere. An EV goes into thermal runaway in an underground car park, but doesn't ignite. And this is that first video I showed you. And we always try to have first responders present at our tests. And one of them present then had their thermal imaging camera pointing at the module. It only ever showed a temperature of 127 degrees centigrade. But our thermocouple showed temperatures of 500 or more degrees centigrade. And in New South Wales, September 2022, they went into a home where the battery energy storage system had gone into thermal runaway, boiled off the vapor cloud, filled the house with vapor. Their thermal imaging cameras could not detect the heat source. This is the Fremantle Highway, 500 electric vehicles on board. You can see the deck is bowed, 2.5 meters along the whole 100 meters of the length. What you see there, in my view, is the vapor cloud. That was a vapor cloud explosion. Sadly, one crew member died on board that vessel. The hazards of electric vehicles are not the same as internal combustion. This is stated often, and it's based on the heat release rates. And the heat release rates are comparable. 80% from the huge amount of plastic on board, 20% from the batteries. But this does not take into account the confined and unconfined vapor cloud explosion hazards. Or more recently, the use of composite and alloy chassis, which burn as well. And we're starting to see cell-to-pack topologies, which are far more energy dense as they try to increase the range of electric vehicles. Even small lithium-ion batteries can cause fires and explosions to develop very quickly. This is simply a power pack. Interestingly, she tries to stamp it out in her bare feet. Not perhaps the best action to take. This is a small hybrid battery pack. It took a lot to drive this into thermal runaway. It's in a complete metal box riveted together. And you can see, what you will hear is the popping of the blast caps on the cells and the projection of the vapor cloud. This is only 2 kilowatt hours. Electric vehicles go from 40 to 100 kilowatt hours. Electric HGVs, up to 1,000 kilowatt hours. This is from the same test from the inside. The sound's not working too well at the moment. Power tools. Anything the size of a power tool battery or above can cause a major fire. This is an e-scooter, 1/4 of a kilowatt hour. The dog is the most intelligent creature present. Those are the blast caps going on the cylindrical cells. He goes to turn off the charge. And you get an explosion. This is in the West Midlands. An e-bike vents and explodes. You can't hear as the owner screaming, "Get out, get out." Pressurized stairwells. This was completely new to me. E-bike fire thrown into the well, filled the whole stairwell with smoke when the fire service entered. This is a synthetic mixture of lithium-ion battery gases. And this is what's happening in people's homes. That's equivalent to a small e-bike or a small residential battery energy storage system. It's not electric cars that are killing people. There's only been 4 deaths as far as I know. Emma can correct me on this. And now we're in crashes. It's light electric vehicles, e-scooters and e-bikes that are killing people. And again, these statistics are from EV FireSafe. And the consequences are horrible and are totally preventable by some simple guidelines like these. I won't bother with that one. Putting a fire out without stopping thermal propagation switches the hazard from fire to explosion. The first set of tests we did were done at Durham and Darlington, which got an extraction system. Great people. And we've spent the last month here at Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. Big thanks to Andy Holden, who's out there, as I've said, and Aidan, who was assigned to us for the whole of the 3 weeks of testing. We had a week of charging beforehand. This was a very rare day in that it was sunny and not cold. I wouldn't say it was warm, but this was a rare example. But that's the test facility there on the right. Now, what we did at both tests is the same thing. We had 5 modules, each with 8 cells, representing 8 to 10 kilowatt hour domestic battery energy storage system. We overcharged only 2 cells in the second bottom module, let it go into fire. We do the pointing in the way they are so that the fire blasts out the back and then comes round, so we don't blast the fire officer, who we send in after a minute in full breathing apparatus with the suppression system. We tried, initially we did cold cut cobra, AVD, bit of liquid nitrogen and water mist with F500. These ones we did liquid nitrogen. We basically did 3 to 6 in these tests. In these tests, 3 to 6, we did 3 tests on each extinguisher. And this is a typical result. It doesn't matter what we used. It does not matter. So I've got to advance it, as you can see, to 1 minute 20 seconds. So it goes into thermal runaway. And then Aidan dashes in with the handheld suppression system. Initially, what you see is lots of steam. But as that steam gets denser and starts to billow around about now and starts to be heavier than air, what you're actually seeing is the vapor cloud, like that. And even though it's a ventilation system, at some point, every single time, we had to pull Aidan out. Even though there's a ventilation system sucking the air, this was filling the room and we were worried about an explosion. And the lines dropping down are the voltages. The lines rising up are the thermocouples between the modules and on the back of the case. That battery energy storage system was open fronted, so we are giving those extinguishers the best possible chance to get in and do the job. But as you can see, cells after cells after cells just collapse. This is hot off the press. We haven't had a chance to analyze this data yet. We're now in the last few days of the third week, the fourth week overall of the tests. So we've got many months of analysis. The bottom line is that anything that does not stop thermal propagation, kills the fire, but does not stop thermal propagation, switches the hazard from fire to explosion. And that includes all of these, every single one. And water mist, I've seen water mist deployed on a burning electric vehicle, killed the fire, no problem. But there was a massive hydrogen explosion above the water mist head. Because if you kill the fire, what you've done is effectively what you've got is a cracked gas cylinder venting up to 50–80% hydrogen. And you do not need fire for thermal propagation. Some of these suppliers are claiming that their systems work. For example, aerosols, repeated claims that they are perfect for battery energy storage systems. My charitable view is that they are mistaken and think that you need fire for thermal propagation. I won't repeat my uncharitable view. This is a fire blanket. I do believe fire blankets have got a role. It's being deployed. They think that's smoke. It's not. It's the vapor cloud. And that fire officer was very lucky. He could have easily been killed if there wasn't a howling crosswind, as it was. The only victims were his trousers. And there are problems with deploying fire blankets because of those flames shooting out at chin level. Foam doesn't work. This is a Japanese test where they built a plastic room around around an EV, sent it into fire, left the roof off, then filled the room with foam. They were delighted that apparently this video is not going to work on me. Apparently it killed the fire, but the vapor cloud is boiling out of the top. And don't do this. This is a fire officer called to a fire. Apparently, the owner saw his car on fire, boiling off smoke, jumped in, pulled it back down the drive, called the fire service. When the fire service arrived, it was quiescent, nothing. So this chap is in a COVID mask. He's kneeling down with a foam fire extinguisher, trying to cool the battery pack. Remember, the flames shoot out at shin level, and they're at least 1200 degrees centigrade. And he doesn't realize it's gone into thermal runaway because it's out of sight. If you inject water into the battery pack, the undamaged cells will generate hydrogen and oxygen. This is the Rosenbauer system that punches a hole in the battery pack from underneath, injects water. The first time this was done was on a Tesla S, and it resulted in a massive thermal event. Undamaged cells will generate hydrogen and oxygen. There are no silver bullets yet, but there are salesmen who tell you they have them. And finally, a thought experiment. You come across an electric vehicle, it's crashed in a ditch, and you're a member of the public, not necessarily a fire officer. You hear a loud popping noise and hissing, and then you see smoke. Well, what do? Well, I don't know. It's way above my pay grade, but it's not a thought experiment. This is a quote from a fire commander, actually, in Australia. We only risk our lives for lives that can be saved. How long might you have? Something wrong with my videos at the moment. 6 seconds, maybe. Thank you for your kind attention.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Certainly gives us a lot to think about. We'll just see if we have got a couple of questions or anything for you. Anyone got any burning questions you want to ask?
You're all asleep?
Okay, one question, Paul, is it better to let it burn out as opposed to try and control it by letting all the gases burn off.
Yes, for a whole host of reasons. With an electric vehicle, you don't have worries over handover, about reignition. It's just scrap metal. And it doesn't matter if you pour water on an EV that's in thermal runaway, it's going to do no good at all. You might put the fire out, in which case it'll keep boiling off the vapor cloud.
Lovely. Anything else? Yep. Would putting a fine mist into the air capture the gas droplets and contain anything?
I think there is a role for things like water curtains, but again, I think Emma's in a far better position to answer these questions because she's far more experienced on the actual applied side. Well, is experienced, and I'm not on the applied side of things. So what I would suggest is you keep that one until Emma's finished.
Lovely. Anything else? One more.
Post-storage of a vehicle which has been, for example, severely damaged, what to do with the disassembly and removal of the battery? How can we consider we might be able to do that safely without agitating the battery such that it is?
Right. So what I'll say, Paul, is post-incident, best place for the vehicle to go, and also for vehicle examiners, etc. How can they remove the battery or deal with it without aggravating any further thermal runaway?
You've got to be very, very careful because it depends how the battery's being damaged. What I worked with Derbyshire Police for a while to get their standard operating procedures, especially with their forensics unit. And what I suggested there, which I think they adopted, is that you really need two people present. One who just stands back and watches while the other one does the examination or whatever. As to the removal of the battery pack, it's really going to be down to the training of specialist companies, operatives or whatever, because you cannot see the damage. And for example, there's been tests done where battery cells have been shaken vigorously for an extended period of time, and they've then done standard tests, electrical tests, which have shown no damage. But when they've taken the cells apart, done a post-mortem, key contacts have broken, and it could have actually resulted in thermal runaway. So the tests that are available to you, you know, where you're not actually going in, didn't show up any problems. So you've got to treat any damaged battery packs with a very great deal of respect and care.
Lovely, fantastic. Thanks, Paul. Apologies, you can't see the audience or anything with the IT issue here. However, these curtains probably do look a lot nicer. Good. Thanks so much, Paul. I'll drop you an email. Certainly gives us something to think about.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the
Lovely.
freezing cold rain that is Bury, Greater Manchester, and assist my team who will be cursing me for being in the nice warm room with a cup of coffee in front of me. So all the very best and stay safe, everybody.
Lovely. Thank you, Paul. Cheers. Take care.
Thanks,
Good luck,
Paul.
Emma. Bye.
See ya.
All yours, Emma.
Cool, no worries. Let me see if you can see that.
Yep.
Awesome. Just to check, is that slide moving?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, so thanks for the invite, John. Morning, everybody. It's great following Paul because he kind of freaks everybody out with the very obvious issues that we have with lithium-ion batteries and electric vehicles, but hopefully I can provide you a bit of context and some of the emerging solutions that we're starting to see and develop. So as I mentioned before, EV Firesafe researches electric vehicle battery fires and emergency response, so funded by the Department of Defence to do that here in Australia. In particular, where our research started was how many electric vehicle battery fires occur while the vehicle's connected to energised charging. That adds another layer of complexity for emergency response. The reason Defence have funded us is for projects like this. This is a Bushmaster armoured personnel carrier, used to be diesel, being converted to electric here in Australia. So this is an emergency response guide that we've been working on an ERG for this vehicle recently, which has been interesting. So the core of what we do is we track real world incidents in electric cars, buses and trucks. Now we won't have captured everything because we're trying to do this globally. It's quite common for us to miss incidents and find out about them a year later. There's often no reporting systems, no reporting pathways. So the data at the moment is still emerging. I reckon our database will actually mature in about 5 years, believe it or not. However, currently what we have is a data set that we can start to draw learnings from. So as of today, we've got 466 electric car battery fires on our database. We've always had quite a number under investigation. There are around 26 million electric cars on the road globally. Here's what it looks like year on year. And we actually had a tiny bit of a drop off last year. So in 2021, 2022, the 2 cars that you can see on the screen actually had a fault during the manufacture of the battery cells. Those vehicles were recalled. And even though the number of electric vehicles doubled year on year from 2022 to 23, we actually had that slight drop off. But again, as I mentioned before, the numbers do fluctuate quite a lot because we will often find out about one that we hadn't seen before. By manufacturer, it looks something like this. And Tesla right up the top there. I'm a Tesla Model 3 owner myself. And when I talk to Australian fire agencies, it's usually, I usually get the comment that I'm a Tesla wanker, which I absolutely am. But Tesla are right up the top there for a number of reasons. They are the most common electric vehicle in the world. Certainly here in Australia, they're about 85% of the market here in Australia. And in most parts of the world, they're the early movers in the space. So they're the most common, and they have that instant torque. If you've ever been in one, you know that they go pretty fast off the line. So what we see is quite commonly it was a battery fire due to collision at speed. So someone's been showing off and come undone. With regards to the number of incidents connected to charging, roughly around 18%. That number does fluctuate, as you can imagine. We've benchmarked that against data out of the Netherlands. Theirs is at about 25%. So we're comfortable that this is about right. What this means, and look, I don't really cover it in this particular presentation, but happy to come back and do one just focused on charging infrastructure and how we can mitigate risk around charging infrastructure. But it's important that we, if we're managing any kind of electric vehicle incident, that we're aware if it's connected to charging, because our charging unit, which is fed by AC grid power, is our potential electrocution risk. The car itself is DC circuit, so therefore it's still a risk, but it's a far lower risk. The leading causes of battery fires in electric vehicles are these, where we're able to identify cause. And again, it's actually not that common that we're able to find a clear cause. I mean, collision, the car hitting road debris is fairly obvious, but sometimes I think about 50% of our database is currently unknown cause. But where we can identify it, the leading causes are road traffic collision. The car has run over the top of road debris. So in one case, it was the tow ball off a trailer that bounced along the road, hit the underside of an electric vehicle. If the vehicle has been submerged in water, so I'm talking here flood water, we're okay to drive through puddles. If you've got an electric vehicle submerged in water for an extended period, particularly coastal flooding, so particularly salty water, we have an increased risk of battery fire. Essentially, the water ingresses into the pack, causes corrosion, and then we get a fire. Exposure to an external fire, so jumping across one there, exposure to an external fire, so something like a bushfire or a building fire, that can often take the vehicle out as well, leading to the fire spreading to the battery. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, product recall has been one of the leading causes. So there's been a fault during the manufacture of that battery cell, leading to a number of fires. Another little interesting fact out of the Netherlands. So the Netherlands, I'll mention them a few times in this presentation, are the only one of the few countries tracking their national data. So they've got really good data for us. So another bit of information out of the Netherlands is in 2022, there were 118 electric vehicles on fire. but only 38% of those involve the high voltage battery. So we've kind of got two electric vehicle fires. We've got combustibles burning, and then we've got thermal runaway in the battery pack, as you saw with Paul's presentation. So how do we know the difference between that? So this is Australia's last electric vehicle battery fire. This occurred in September last year. And there's a couple of telltale signs. As soon as the team and I saw this video, we went, that's a battery fire. Very, very clearly a battery fire. Let me play that again for you. So you can see on the right, we've got flames, we've got them down low, they're around where the battery pack sits. We've got our firefighter on the right, it's pouring water onto that, and the flames are just not knocking down. So these are the very clear characteristics of thermal runaway. So just one more time. And then off to the left there, you can kind of see those jet-like flames that, that again, Paul mentioned in his presentation. Now, this particular car was owned by Tesla themselves. They very kindly donated it to us. So I actually told my colleague Dan Fish that it was his new company car. But on the ground there, you can see the battery cells. So this is a Tesla Model 3 long range, 4,416 battery cells in this particular battery pack. So alongside Tesla, we took it to their workshop and pulled it apart. And this particular car had run over road debris. So it was actually a truck carrying scrap metal, and it actually dropped an 18-kilo chunk of metal on the ground on the road. The Tesla hit it at 111.98 kilometers per hour. I know that might not mean a lot to you in miles, but and you can just see there the point of impact, and then that tail shaft actually tore down through that module there. So there are 4 modules in this pack. This little section here is the only section of battery, the whole battery pack that was still where we still had some live cells. Everything else had burnt out over time. So it was a really interesting little exercise. And once we'd pulled the pack out, we actually took it out to a fire brigade who have the very cool name of Nanagoon Fire Brigade. This is their salvage yard, or their road rescue yard. And then we cut it up. So that car is currently in about, must be in about 1,000 pieces by now. So electric vehicle battery fires are very rare in our road registered passenger electric vehicles, but we have lots of new risks and hazards, again, as Paul spoke about before. I want to talk about battery fire, but I also want to talk about road traffic collision, because another fact that we now have data for, is that certainly here in Australia, we're seeing an electric vehicle involved in road traffic collision pretty much on a weekly basis, if not a bit more often. But again, here in Australia, we've only had 6 electric vehicle battery fires, that last one I showed you being number 6. So I think it's really important we're aware, of course, of battery fire risk, but I think it's also vitally important that every emergency responder, from fire, non-fire, right through to secondary responder, right through to salvage, are aware of our risks around road traffic collision, and then a secondary or a delayed ignition further down the track. So as Paul mentioned, thermal runaway is, I won't go too much down this rabbit hole because Paul's kind of covered this off, but thermal runaway very basically can occur if we imagine these battery cells are in our Tesla, they've been impacted, they start to heat up at approximately 170 degrees. It kind of gets to the point of no return. The cell bursts, that popping noise that Paul was talking about, the little blast cap on the top of the cell there bursts open, starts to release its toxic gases. Those gases ignite, the heat dissipates to the next cell and the next cell. And you kind of get this domino effect. Thermal runaway is that domino effect. And as I said before, the Tesla I showed you before had 4,416 cylindrical battery cells, lithium-ion battery cells in them. So again, this is why, when you start to kind of talk about it in these terms, you can see why often an electric vehicle battery fire is typically, for our data, it's typically a 3 to 5 hour incident. Again, as Paul talked about, we've got 3 main hazards. So we've got that off-gassing, toxic off-gassing, ignition, and we've got explosion. Our data indicates that explosion occurs in around 5% of cases. I believe we currently have about 28 verified vapor cloud explosions in electric cars. And again, as Paul mentioned, these are our early warning signs. So This graphic in particular is really important for emergency responders. It's a nice single visual look at if we're on scene with any kind of electric vehicle or lithium-ion battery incident, these are our early warning signs that fire may be imminent. Another bit of nice new data that we actually only found very recently is, again, talking about this jet-like flame. So this is a testing report, a testing program. Now, it was very interesting because this is one of the very few times we've been able to say this is how long a jet-like flame can actually, how wide it can get. So we've been looking for this kind of information so we can kind of give the general rule of thumb of if your car is 1.8 meters wide, your jet-like flame is, you know, that plus another 25%. But unfortunately, we don't have enough data to do that just yet. But the interesting part about this is that when thermal runaway occurred, 17 seconds after ignition, there was that first jet of flame that lasted 5.7 seconds, about 2 meters long. Then we get the second jet of flame, lasted a little bit longer. That's our longest jet there. Then we had a third, and then we had a fourth. And you can see the chart on the right there that kind of, you know, shows you that effect, that jet-like flame effect that can occur. And as Paul said, if we're working around an electric vehicle trying to extricate, and we have a thermal runaway event, firstly, we don't know how long that jet-like flame will be. That will depend on a number of factors like state of charge, ambient temperature, those kinds of things. And we don't know where around the vehicle that may appear from. So depending on where the battery vent might be, or depending if the vehicle's been in a collision and part of the pack's torn open, that jet-like flame can really appear from anywhere around that vehicle. So our early warning signs that we talked about before, the popping, hissing, whistling that Paul was talking about, they are our signs to very, very quickly get away from the car. And this slide is Paul's work. So he was talking before about the different ways in which vapor clouds can appear or occur. As I said, I believe currently we have 28 verified vapor cloud explosions with electric vehicles. So as Paul mentioned, it can build up in the pack, it can build up in the vehicle itself. It can be just kind of an open space, but more typically we see it in an enclosed space like a garage. So I usually talk a bit more about that, but I don't usually have Paul Christensen presenting before me. So I've got a great opportunity to talk to you about other hazards that we will see primarily in road traffic collisions involving EVs and lithium-ion batteries. So we want to talk about chemical exposure. So I often get the question around electrolyte in lithium-ion batteries. Of course, that's what's kind of catching fire if there's thermal runaway. But what's the toxicity of that? So obviously very toxic to humans, but in such small quantities within the battery cell that we typically, we have never seen a pool of liquid electrolyte from a lithium-ion battery. And I'm very happy to be proven wrong if someone in the room has seen that. But pools of liquid underneath an electric vehicle following a road traffic collision is, particularly if it's colored, you know, blue, green, pink, that kind of thing, is typically coolant. As I say, we haven't seen an incident where there's not enough electrolyte to actually form a pool of liquid there. Battery cells can become projectile. There's this crazy couple of Russian guys on YouTube that do these great videos that I highly recommend you look up. So this is a single cylindrical battery cell, and you can see there that the kind of effect, it essentially becomes a bit of a rocket. So on scene with an electric vehicle battery fire, you know, the packs are quite well sealed, that kind of thing. We sometimes see this, but not with that kind of explosive effect that you just saw. However, with e-bikes and e-scooters, this is becoming more common. And last year in the States, a fire investigator had one of these the day after an e-bike set fire to a private home. The fire investigator actually had one explode in his face, which hospitalized him. So for our fire investigators in the room, this is a real risk to your safety. Any lithium-ion battery, doesn't matter if it looks like it's been burnt or burnt out, can still be live and can still become projectile. Uncontrolled movement. I'm going to play this again for you in a sec. I'm sure some of you have seen this video before, but this firefighter, this is a hybrid vehicle, not a plug-in electric vehicle, but a hybrid vehicle. Firefighter that was injured down the bottom there. Couldn't hear any engine noise, thought the vehicle was off, got in to help the driver, hadn't stabilised first, and of course, unfortunately was injured. Air quality, again, as Paul's pointed out, we do not want to be breathing in this vapour cloud, and just as we wouldn't with any smoke from any kind of vehicle fire. So breathing apparatus is essential. If you're in the room and you're non-fire emergency responder, so that could be, you know, paramedic, police, roadside assist, towing, the being aware of what you're looking at. It doesn't really matter if it's vapor cloud or smoke, but being aware of what you're looking at. You don't want to be in that vapor or smoke cloud. You do not want to be breathing that in, particularly our ambulance, our paramedic friends. As a firefighter, when I attend vehicle accidents on the freeway, typically all I see is paramedics' asses hanging out of the car to help somebody. So we want paramedics in particular to be more aware of these early warning signs to avoid being exposed to particularly the vapor cloud. Water quality, look, again, we have no kind of globally agreed data on the toxicity of water used on an electric vehicle or a lithium-ion battery fire. Where possible, if we can retain it, that's fantastic, and obviously speak to your local authority, your EPA, or whatever the equivalent is in the area you're operating in. And just a note, again, another video some of you may have seen, these are e-scooter batteries in, I think it was Bristol, Bristol 2021. Some of you may have even attended. They were put into a tank and they continue to burn underwater. But I haven't put the volume on this video, but in the background you can hear people talking. They're not wearing BA, and it's a really important point that this is a great technique for managing this incident, but that's still toxic vapor cloud that's boiling off the top of the surface of the water there. So if you are using a submersion technique, please don't take the BA off afterwards. So typically EV FireSafe looks at, we started with cars and then we moved to trucks and buses, and then we thought, let's try to do everything on wheels, every lithium-ion battery on wheels, and let's see where the issues actually lie. So in the first half of last year, we got our researchers onto everything you see on the screen, and I don't need to tell anyone in the room where our issues with lithium-ion battery fires sit, but it's a really interesting snapshot of there's a lot of concern in the community about Teslas and this and Leafs and BYDs and that kind of thing, and rightly so. And then, you know, I hear people all the time talking about electric buses are terrible and the devil's work and this kind of thing, and electric trucks and da. But actually, our risk to life and property safety is very firmly with personal mobility devices, e-bikes, scooters and electric skateboards, electric unicycles, that kind of thing. So our researchers started tracking all of these incidents for the first half of last year. We got to 500 battery fires and PMDs, and we essentially couldn't keep up. We'd need 10 researchers just on PMDs. And again, I'm sure everyone in the room is probably quite familiar with that. The reason we wanted to do this is to break down some of the misconceptions around a road registered electric vehicle. So our cars, buses, trucks, compared to our light electric vehicles, our personal mobility devices. And the differences are quite simple. With road registered, it's highly regulated. There are lots of certifications, crash testing, lots of design rules that have to be met. They're very sophisticated battery cells, a high quality battery management system, and really good occupant safety, that kind of thing. And of course, in our e-bikes, e-scooters, we're seeing such poor quality, you know, particularly where here in Australia we can, you know, you can click a button and get something drop shipped from China pretty quickly, sort of, you know, within 2 or 3 days. And what we've seen in the Philippines is we lost a family of 5 to an e-bike that the cell quality and the battery management system was such poor quality that when the the bike battery reached 100% state of charge, the battery management system couldn't actually switch that off. It was so poor quality, it couldn't actually stop the charge. That led to thermal runaway, and it killed mum, dad, and 3 children under the age of 5. They're one of 4 whole families we've lost in the 18 months starting in 2023. So to help, I guess, categorize both quality and emergency response, we've created a lithium-ion battery categorization. So where is our risk? Is there an emergency response guide? Sorry for all the acronyms, but ERG is emergency response guide. The emergency response guide is, as you're probably familiar, a guide written by the manufacturer of that product to say, here's what we want you to do if this vehicle is involved in an accident or is on fire. Here are our instructions to you as emergency responders. Some emergency response guides are great, some are a bit rubbish, but what we're pushing for, EV FireSafe is pushing for, certainly here in Australia and globally. I'm actually heading you away in a couple of weeks to speak at the Nordic EV Summit to speak to all the vehicle manufacturers. Is we need emergency response guides, we need isolation methods, we need some more guidance from the manufacturers to help us manage these incidents. So this categorization's on our website if you want to have a bit more of a look, and if you want to, we have a bigger version that has a bit more detail in it. If you want that, just drop me a line. But it's a really important point that I think Paul made as well, that lithium-ion batteries are literally everywhere. This is one in a dog's chew toy, believe it or not. That was never going to end well. This is a large PMD in a lift. Oops. One of our big emerging risks at the moment, sorry, let me go back just super quickly. This is a new category here, utility task electric vehicles. Golf buggies, last mile delivery vans for supermarkets. They're not quite a road registered car. They're not quite an e-bike. They sit somewhere in the middle. They maybe used to be lead acid. They've been converted to lithium ion, or they've been built up from lithium ion. These are a new emerging risk. So these utility task electric vehicles, this golf buggy on the right here was turned into an ambulance patient mover for events. It later burnt down their depot. That picture on the bottom right is the spalling from the concrete in the roof of that depot. I don't know, we haven't heard whether or not that depot is now being condemned, but I would imagine with that kind of level of damage, it's a high likelihood. Paul talked a bit about electric buses. About 20, I think we're sitting at 33 electric buses, and we've just had our 10th electric truck battery fire. They're both globally. So both buses and trucks, happen rarely, but obviously, it's an extended incident duration. There may be fire spread. We may be connected to charging, those kinds of things. So the most recent, the second last electric truck fire actually occurred here in Melbourne. I attended to support Fire Rescue Victoria. That incident went for about 8 hours. So they're very long duration incidents. And of course, battery energy storage systems. It's not on wheels, so we typically don't look at these too much. This is Paul's domain, but this was my very first lithium-ion battery fire back in 2021 that I ever attended. So this is a Tesla Megapack. So I want to move into, what do we do about all of this? How do we manage these incidents? How do we make ourselves safer? As Paul mentioned, there's no silver bullet for putting out a thermal runaway event. And as I mentioned at the start, I want to also give you the tools to start thinking about how to manage electric vehicles just in road traffic collisions. And I'm sure you're already doing that, but hopefully this gives you a little more confidence and a little more to think about. So we have this process called IAMS that we've developed over the last 12 months within our team. Our team is, there's about 9 of us now, and 7 of us are also firefighters. We have a member of our team who recently completed, she's ex-QFES, a Queensland Fire Emergency, and she completed doctorate in incident management, so this is a bit of a team effort. So we have kind of two versions of this. So this is IAMS for our fire, roadside assist, tow, salvage. And then we kind of just take out the bits for paramedics and police where there's an electrocution or a unexpected uncontrolled movement risk. But essentially what we're looking at is this: identify, assess, immobilize, isolate, monitor, and to keep it nice and simple, identify, immobilize, isolate. If we can do those three things, we're already making ourselves very much safer around electric vehicles in traffic collisions. So we always now say here in Australia, assume you're dealing with an electric vehicle till proven otherwise. We have this lovely little blue EV badge on our number plates. I know you guys sometimes have a green flash on yours, but in Australia, the blue EV badge is actually mandatory. I don't believe that's the case in the UK, but hopefully there are obviously a lot more EVs on the road there. So hopefully you're becoming more aware of how to identify what you're dealing with in terms of vehicle driveline. When we talk about assessing the situation, there's a number of steps that we like to kind of talk about. So the first is finding the emergency response guide. We've developed what we call an EVABC, and I'll talk about that in a sec. We think about our approach, any exposures, and then for vapor cloud risk, think about ventilating as well. So emergency response guides, again, you might, I'm sure you guys are familiar with these. The Euro Rescue app is one that we also use here in Australia. We have our own ANCAP Rescue app. Some of you may have access to Moditech Crash Recovery System. That's an excellent system. That's a licensed one, so not all agencies have it. So finding the emergency response guide, as I said, that's the Bible from the vehicle manufacturer, from the OEM to us as emergency responders to say, here's what we want you to do if you have an issue. The EV ABC, so we're still developing this internally in our team, and it will be shared soon. And the EV ABC has applicability across the board. So incident management, towing, salvage, right through to when that vehicle, that battery pack is actually shredded or wrecked. So assessment of battery condition. So once our high voltage systems have shut down, so our airbags have deployed or we've cut a cut loop, those kinds of things, once our high voltage systems have shut down, we have no way of determining the likelihood of a battery fire in that vehicle. So what we're developing with EVABC is a thermal and visual check that will give the vehicle a point score, and depending on that score, that determines the next action that we will take. So probably haven't explained that very well, but that's something. It's currently on our website, but we're developing it for, as I say, the various sectors. How do firefighters use EVABC? How do police? How do paramedics? How to tow, salvage? How to roadside assist? And roadside. I mentioned roadside assist here in particular because we do have some concerns about the roadside assist charging. You know, you can rock up, and if you run out of charge with your car, you can have roadside assist come and charge your car up. And we want to kind of talk to that sector about, let's do a quick check of that battery pack, because is it just a flat battery, or do we have a pack that's had some kind of impact that we can't see or we haven't looked for? And when we go charging it up, are we going to actually potentially cause a battery fire? So when we assess, we're looking for any high voltage cables, scattered cells, buildup of liquids on the ground. As I said, pools of liquid, typically coolant, any smoke, any temperature increase, those kinds of things, using our inner circle, outer circle kind of dynamic risk assessment. As you saw before, we want to be careful about how we approach from the sides. We don't want to approach from the front, silent and rapid movement. And then our exposures, as I said before, our charging units pose a greater electrocution risk than the vehicle itself. So is the vehicle connected to charging? And it may be that, you know, in the vapor clouds that Paul talked about before, it may be connected to charging, but maybe we can't see that through the vapor cloud. So checking whether or not we actually have that electrical hazard as well is really important. How do we shut down the power to that charging unit? Here in Australia, we have a an isolation switch that has to be within 2 meters of the unit. I didn't get a chance to look up what the rules are in the UK, but what we're pushing for again globally is a master isolation switch. It'll cost the building owner, maybe another 500 quid to do it, and they'll whinge about it. But if we've got 100 charging units and we've got some kind of problem at charging unit number 50, let's just shut down the whole lot until we figure out what's going on. Let's make ourselves as safe as possible there. And then, as Paul talked about before, risk of vapor cloud explosion, where possible and doing it carefully, can we release those gases from an enclosed space? And you saw the video of the single car garage where the door kind of blows outwards. So, how can we get that, disperse that vapor cloud to reduce that risk? When we move on to immobilize, we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from that silent, unexpected movement. Again, I'm talking Tesla here because, again, they're the most common electric vehicle. So in the Teslas up until recently, there was a park button on the end of the stalk. We chock the wheels front of front, rear of rear. Make sure in other electric vehicles, put the vehicle into park, press the button, press the on-off button, those kinds of things. Use your emergency response guide to figure out how to do that. Then we want to isolate the high voltage system. So our battery pack sits down low underneath the vehicle in cars. We want all the power to drain back to that battery. So if we need to cut into the car and we accidentally hit a high voltage cable, which is unlikely, but it's a risk, we're not going to be run any risk of electrocution. So the high voltage battery pack should isolate when the airbags deploy. So if you've got an incident where the airbags are deployed, our high voltage power should be isolated back down to that pack. But because we can't measure DC power, we can't check that. There's no way of checking that's actually occurred. It's an important point that if you've got a 12, 16 or 24 volt battery and you disconnect that, that does not, in most electric vehicles, that does not isolate high voltage. All that will do is shut down your doors and your windows and chairs and things. So in the emergency response guide, find out how to isolate the high voltage system. So in some you've got a cut loop, some you've got a pull fuse, pull plug, in some you've got nothing at all. In all vehicles, we have a manual service disconnect. The ones at the top, as you can see, are all low voltage methods. So they're all, you could, in theory, do those with wet hands and non-insulated tools and we'd still be fine. But our manual service disconnect is a high voltage connection, often to the battery pack itself, sometimes to other high voltage components. Because it's not always, it should be in the emergency response guide, but maybe we haven't had a chance to look up what the voltage of that particular car is. And electric vehicles can run from, anywhere really at the moment from 400 to about 800 volts DC. We don't, here in Australia, we don't carry 1,000-volt gloves typically on trucks. So our advice from EV Firesafe is we're happy to pull or cut loops, pull fuses, pull plugs, but where an emergency response guide directs a responder to a manual service disconnect, if that vehicle's been in a workshop environment, mechanics workshop, yeah, happy days. We can pull that plug with all the right equipment. But by the side of the road, following a collision, it's pissing with rain, you're standing in wet grass, we're not comfortable pulling that manual service disconnect. Then at all times, monitor for those early signs of thermal runaway. So our popping, hissing, whistling noise, that sickly sweet smell, projectile cell debris, dark light vapor cloud. If we're seeing or hearing those things, as I said before, it's time to get away from the vehicle. Now, I wanted to just give a few last thoughts. We've been doing a bit of work with police and ambulance lately. Our focus has always been on fire, but as I said before, we want to talk about vehicles in road traffic collision. Police actually have the biggest risk from lithium-ion batteries of any emergency agency because they're seeing them across so many parts of their actual agency. So I recently helped Victoria Police down here in Melbourne. They were seizing vapes. We've got like e-cigarette wars happening here at the moment, and they're seizing vapes, and they had about 5,000 of them, and they rang and said, how do we store these safely through an Australian summer? So we wanted them away from buildings. We found a shipping container that didn't have ventilation. We had to put some air conditioning into it. So it's been a whole thing about how do we actually, A, manage a collision, B, how do we move an electric vehicle? What do we do with damaged vehicles in impound, or if they need to be stored for exhibits? What do we do about fire investigation or forensic investigation? What about, you know, the stuff that's being seized? So there's a whole world of stuff to unpack in the police sector for those of you in the room from that space. We're pretty much at the start of that journey, unfortunately, but we'll get there. With paramedics, your risks are major risks or primary risk is on scene with any road traffic collision, but also with e-bikes and e-scooters. I recently spoke to a paramedic up in Queensland who said to me, "Oh, we had a kid come off an e-scooter. He kind of came off a curb and he fell off, and we got called. So we put the e-scooter in the ambulance and then took it with him to the hospital because it cost him quite a lot of money. So we put it in the ambulance." Now, you've just seen some of those videos I showed you of that vapor cloud explosion. You've just seen what Paul's shown you as well. So the biggest take home, if you're a paramedic in the room, please do not put these in the back of the ambulance. Please do not put them in the ambulance. Please do not put them under the bed in the emergency department. Leave them where they are. Do not touch them. I don't care if they cost his parents, some kid's parents, $9,000 to buy it. Leave it where it is. It is a risk to your life if you put it in an ambulance. Using the IAMS procedure, as I said before, maybe paramedics aren't going to be isolating high voltage systems or pulling up emergency response guides, but certainly being aware of your dynamic risk assessment, your exposures, your charging units, monitoring for those early signs of thermal runaway, really important. And then roadside assist, tow and salvage. And I'm sorry to lump you all in the one kind of bucket here, but I didn't want to spend too much time on each one, but we are again working in each of these sectors to build our awareness around what are your risks, what are your challenges here. So again, using that IAMS procedure, I'm assuming it's going to be possible for you guys to isolate high voltage systems using those low voltage methods. And then when we go from tow to salvage yard, it's really important for the tow driver to hand over as much information about the vehicle as possible. So we're working very heavily in the salvage sector at the moment, and we're having to guess what's happened to these vehicles, these electric vehicles. So we're currently working on a platform that's basically a battery passport. So once it's been involved in a collision, we get some information from emergency responders. That goes to the tow truck driver, that goes to salvage. Based on the information that's come in about the electric vehicle, salvage can then say, yeah, cool, that's good to go in general population, or we're going to go quarantine this with a 15-meter clearance because we're concerned about fire risk. So that EVA-BC process, we're currently working on adapting that here and testing that here in Australia, and hopefully that will, in the next kind of 3 to 6 months, we'll be able to roll that out a bit further afield. But always that being alert to those early warning signs, popping, hissing, whistling. So that's me. If there's still any time left, so I don't know if we've got any time, but happy to take any questions, or I'll make this pack. I'll email you this pack, John, so you can share it if anybody wants to have another look at it.
That'd be fantastic. That was great. Thank you so much. Very informative. Again, a lot to think about. Fantastic. Have we got any questions for Emma? Are they looking about more protection around battery modules, or making them a little bit more robust? I know, looking at reducing the number of cells in battery packs.
Sorry, as in the vehicle manufacturers are they looking at that?
Are you pushing for that?
Not pushing for a reduction in the number of battery cells, pushing for more interaction between the vehicle OEMs and the emergency response community. So Tesla do a really good job of emergency response guides, of emergency responder training. We want that from every OEM. And then we want that low voltage method of isolation. So, you know, Tesla's got a cut loop, Hyundai's got a pull fuse or a pull plug, BMW do, MG do, but BYDs have nothing. The BYD Atto 3 and the Dolphin, they've only got manual service disconnects. So does the Polestar, so does the Nissan Leaf. We want something low voltage that we can cut or pull, that then we go, okay, now we're safer. It's not an expensive thing to put into an electric vehicle. It's just laziness by the manufacturers that they haven't done it. So it's that kind of thing we're going to be very gently bullying them with.
Lovely. Yep.
With regards to obviously RTC is fine. Fire service in a good situation. We've got PA, we've got breathing in the vapor cloud. Comes to the people in the car and first responders, obviously with the Dragon, apparent escapers. Are they pointless with the vapor cloud? Are they going to be able to breathe them in? Is there anything for the emergency spot for the paramedics? So to make sure that vapor cloud.
Yeah. So question there, Emma, was obviously we've got breathing apparatus as fire crews. Is there anything we can that is available for obviously other responders or the casualties in the vehicle? We currently have the Draeger escape hoods that we could give people in structural fires. Will they work? Will they do the same? Is there any other options out there for those not in breathing apparatus?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is we don't know. And the longer answer is we don't know. And if someone does get a lung full of vapor cloud from a lithium-ion battery in thermal runaway, we don't know what the long-term effects of that are. We haven't had enough incidents. We are aware of a mother and her 4 children who were killed they died from inhalation of the gases from an skateboard that went into thermal runaway in their apartment, so a small apartment room where they were all sleeping before the fire occurred. The resulting fire put another 138 people into hospital and pretty much destroyed the building. But the 5 people died from inhalation. So the short answer is I would need to have a think about the Draeger smoke hoods. But the very, very short answer is no. Paramedics, anyone without breathing apparatus needs to get away from that lithium-ion battery or that car very, very quickly.
Lovely, thank you. Any more? Yep.
For those representing the response unity, start pushing motor manufacturers, putting in a high voltage disconnect on the outside of the vehicle behind a panel where every member of the public, every responder can access without fail and without having to climb in the car. Is that a better method to go for instead of perhaps going for the low voltage thing? May not work at the time. High voltage disconnect being the absolute safe method.
All right, nice one. I'll try and shorten that question because I can't remember it.
I got that one.
Is there a push for
John.
manufacturers? Did you get it?
I've got
nice
it.
One.
Yeah. No, there's not, for 2 reasons. Every man and his dog would pull it as they walk past the car. And the second reason is no manufacturer will do something that is that, I guess, I don't know what the word is, but they're very cautious about having to admit that they may have a high voltage or an electrocution or a battery fire risk. There's a whole bunch of legal issues tied up in that. So no, unfortunately, I think the cut loop and pull fuses under the bonnet is the best we're going to get, and that's, as I said before, that's what we're gently kind of bullying them into. Did that answer the question?
Yep, lovely. Oh, I got a few. Yep.
Just for information, Scania trucks and buses have that fitted already on the outside?
I was saying Scania bus and trucks have got that fitted on the outside already.
E-stop or manual service disconnect?
Master switch.
Okay, I'll have a look.
Lovely. Yep.
sides of the vehicle. Have you seen any fires where the projectile flames are coming out front and back?
Did you get that one?
No.
Okay, so all the evidence showing that the projectile flames come out the side of the vehicle. Is there any evidence to show it could come out the front, back, top, or anywhere else?
Yeah, the jet lag flames will come from anywhere around the vehicle. So if the vehicle pack is intact, some vehicles have a battery vent. All Teslas have a battery vent at the rear, because if they have a jet lag flame, that's the position that we're least likely to be standing in, typically. But if that pack has been torn open, so it's run over road debris or it's been in a collision and the pack's torn open, jet lag flame will come from that area as well. So as you saw from the photo I showed you before, the flames actually, the car we tore down, flames came from underneath the vehicle. The one prior to that was a high-speed collision, and the front kind of leading edge, the driver's leading edge was torn open. So jet lag flames came from the front of that particular vehicle. So we have there's nothing I can say to you to say, yeah, general rule of thumb is it's going to come from the driver's side. It can come from anywhere.